Have you ever noticed just how often fear holds us back from getting what we actually want? It sometimes keeps us from trying it all or makes us self sabotage even when we do try. And it comes up a lot. It's a phenomenon that has fascinated me for a long time. So much so that I spent more than 2 years researching all the ways that fear holds us back and surveying more than 4,000 women, and then wrote a book about it called Do It Scared. And while these days I spend a lot of my time helping women over 40 lose weight and get healthy, I've found that underlying fear issue never really goes away. It holds us back from reaching our health goals in many of the same ways it holds us back from a lot of other things in life. And so today I wanted to talk about that, how to overcome your fear of failure and actually take control of your health for good. I want to talk about why that fear happens and what it looks like, and most importantly, what you can actually do about it. It's a powerful topic and one that I hope has a lasting impact on you, maybe even in more ways than just your health. So let's dig in. Welcome to the Feel Better, Live Free podcast brought to you by Thinlicious. I'm your host, Ruth Sukup, and here we'll talk about everything from the science of weight loss to practical tips for making your health a priority in the midst of a busy life. It's a little bit nerdy, a little bit funny, and a little bit revolutionary. So buckle up, friend, because it's about to get real. Hey there, and welcome back to the Feel Better, Live Free podcast. Once again, my name is Ruth Sukup, and I'm the founder of Thinlicious and the creator of the Thin Adapted System, as well as the New York Times bestselling author of 7 books. I'm also a 46-year-old woman who knows exactly what it's like to struggle with your weight and with getting healthy because, let me tell you, I've been there. I have been the woman who has tried every diet under the sun and who has lost and gained the same 20 pounds over and over and over again. And I've been the woman who felt completely paralyzed by the fear of failing yet again, and who just couldn't seem to find the motivation to get started one more time. So if that's you right now, if you're feeling stuck and overwhelmed and paralyzed by that fear of failing, then I want you to know that I get it. I really, really do. But I also want you to know that it doesn't have to be this way. You can lose the weight and get healthy, and you can do it in a way that actually feels good and is sustainable for the long haul. And that's why I'm so excited to dive into today's topic, because I really do think that it's one that so many of us struggle with. Because the truth is that the fear of failure is a very real thing. And it's something that holds us back so often from pursuing so many different goals and dreams, especially when it comes to something as personal and emotional as our health and weight loss journey. And honestly, it's not just the fear of failing, right? But it's the fear of what the failure might mean and how it might make us feel about ourselves. It's the fear of not being good enough or not being able to do it or not having what it takes. It's the fear of looking foolish or being judged or of disappointing the people that we care about. It's the fear of change and the fear of the unknown and the fear of stepping outside of our comfort zones. It's the fear of losing control or of not being able to go back to the way things were. And all of that fear can be incredibly paralyzing. It can keep us stuck in the same patterns and behaviors, even when we know those patterns and behaviors aren't serving us. It can stop us from even getting started or from taking the necessary steps to make real progress. It can keep us from asking for help or even admitting that we need help. It can keep us from being honest with ourselves and from really looking at some of the underlying issues that are holding us back. And it can prevent us from being willing to try something new or from being open to a different way of doing things. It can keep us from being willing to invest in ourselves or from putting the time and effort in that's required to see real results. It prevents us from being patient and from understanding that this is a journey and it's not always going to be easy. But most of all, I think it can keep us from believing in ourselves and from realizing that we are actually capable of so much more than we think. And to me, that's really the saddest part of all, because the reality is that failure is actually a part of life, right? It's something that we all experience at one time or another. And it's something that can actually be a very powerful tool for growth and learning if we're willing to let it be. And the most successful people in the world, the people that we admire and we look up to, are usually the ones who have actually failed the most, right? Because they're the ones who are willing to keep going and keep trying, even when things don't work out the way that they had hoped. But it's not just famous people who dare to fail. It's people in our everyday lives. It's the women in my program, some of who I have actually interviewed on this podcast, who you've been able to listen to, who are daring to push past their fear and actually take control of their health, right? Even if they failed many times before. They're the ones who have been willing to take risks and to step out of their comfort zone. They're the ones who are willing to face their fears and not let it hold them back. They're the ones who have been willing to ask for help and to surround themselves with people who can support and encourage them. They're the ones who have been willing to be honest with themselves and take a good, hard look at what's working and not working to make the necessary changes. They're the ones who are willing to try something new and to be open to a different way of doing things. And they're the ones who have been willing to be patient and to understand that success doesn't always happen overnight and that it's small, consistent steps that we take every single day that add up to big results over time. But most of all, they're the ones who have been willing to believe in themselves and in their own ability to create the life that they want. They have been willing to change their mindset and to let go of limiting beliefs and negative self-talk that's holding them back and just start to take control of their own thoughts and emotions and not let that fear and self-doubt get in the way of that thing they actually want. And that is really the key, right? That's the key to overcoming fear, is changing your mindset and changing the story that you are telling yourself. Because the reality is that we are often our own worst enemy, and the things that we tell ourselves on a daily basis have such a huge impact on our ability to succeed. And so if you are struggling right now to overcome fear and to change your mindset in a way that will actually allow you to make progress towards your health and your weight loss goals, or really any goal that you're working towards, then I want to share a few practical strategies with you today that I think can be really helpful. But before we dive into that, I do want to take a quick second to remind you that if you are brand new to this podcast, if you're new to Thinlicious, and you're just looking for a better way to lose weight and get healthy that actually works, then you should definitely consider joining me for my next free live workshop. I actually host these pretty regularly, and it is a great chance to just learn how our system works and how to get started. But it is also a really good opportunity to ask all your questions and get answers in real time. I'm pretty fun in person, so come and join me. It's totally free, but you do have to register, so you can go do that. You can find out when the next one is at thinlicious.com/workshop. Again, that URL is thinlicious.com/workshop. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's just go ahead and dive in to all the good stuff today and talk about fear and how it might be holding you back when it comes to achieving your health and weight loss goals. And then also talk about some practical strategies for overcoming fear in a way that's going to allow you to make real progress. So what does fear really look like? Well, to be honest, and this is something that I learned in more than 2 years of research from my book, Do It Scared, fear actually looks a little bit different for everyone. And if you've read that book, you know that I introduced a model in that book called the 7 fear archetypes, which is basically the 7 unique ways that fear tends to manifest in our life, right? I even did a TED Talk on it. And understand, when I talk about fear, I'm not actually talking about phobias, right? Sometimes we intermix those two words, fears and phobias. So phobias are like the fear of snakes or the fear of flying. But what I'm talking about is like real fear, right? That deep internal fear, the kind that holds us back from getting what we actually want. So what does this look like for different people? Well, it comes back to the fear archetypes. So let me talk about each of those for a minute, because I think it's really, really important to be able to see yourself in these different fear archetypes. So first off, there's procrastination, right? And the procrastinator fear archetype is also known as the perfectionist. And if you're a perfectionist, you probably already know that about yourself. You might even see it as a source of pride, not realizing maybe that all of those perfectionist tendencies that you have are actually a form of fear, because you use your need for everything to be perfect sometimes as a reason to not do it at all. Can you relate to that? Right? If you're the kind of person who probably typically spends a lot of time doing research or getting organized, or maybe find yourself stalling and finding other things to do rather than that one thing you really need to be doing. You're the one that likes to do all the research and read all the diet books and listen to all the podcasts because reading and listening feels safer than actually starting. You just never quite feel ready. But what you're really afraid of deep down is making a mistake, which is why it's so hard to get going. Because now you're overwhelmed with information overload. And what if you make the wrong choice? Or worse yet, what if you fail? So it's easier just not to begin. And you should know that this fear archetype, the procrastinator slash perfectionist, is actually the most common of all the different fear archetypes. About 40% of the population have this one archetype as their primary archetype. So if this is you, if you're the perfectionist procrastinator, you are definitely not alone. But next up is something that's known as people pleasing. And this is also a very common one, right? And the fear that holds a people pleaser back isn't necessarily the fear of making a mistake, but it's the fear of being judged or the fear of letting people down. Because you care a lot about what people think and sometimes struggle with boundaries or saying no. So, if you're a people pleaser, this could be affecting your health and weight loss journey in lots of different ways. For one, you might feel embarrassed or ashamed of what other people might think if you start another new diet or another new weight loss program, or you're worried that you'll be judged for following a plan that lots of people might tell you is not healthy, right? You're worried about having to justify yourself. And honestly, I've actually seen this with a lot of our clients, friends and family get really judgy when they perceive something as being outside the norm. And that can be hard. If you're a people pleaser, it's really, really hard. Or maybe because you're a people pleaser, you just can't seem to make it past those social situations where you're with other people and facing the peer pressure to indulge in all the things that got you to this point in your health in the first place, right? Maybe you do okay on your own and you feel committed, but the second you're in that social situation, it feels impossible to stand up for yourself or say no to the cake or say no to the drinks, right? Because you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings or make anybody mad. And it might not seem like this is fear holding you back, but it actually is, often in a really big way. Or maybe you're more of a rule follower archetype. And that means for you, as a rule follower, that there is almost always a process that needs to be followed. And it makes you very uncomfortable to stray from that path. You don't even like it when other people step out of the lines, right? You're the person, if this is you, if you're the rule follower, you're the kind of person who always reads the instruction manual from start to finish. And if you are cooking a recipe, you are following it to the letter. In fact, it makes you crazy if you're following a recipe and you see that something is off, right? And the good news for a rule follower is that if you are given the right set of rules and instructions to follow, you will most likely excel. In fact, in all of my different programs that I have business programs and time management programs, right? I find that so many of my most successful clients are actually rule followers because they do the work, they follow the rules, they do all the steps. But the problem for rule followers when it comes to modern health and weight loss is that so many of the rules that you have been given, right? All of the rules that all the experts have been telling us for so long are kind of total BS. And so for all these years, we've been told all these things like, if you want to lose weight, you need to eat less and exercise more and count your calories and eat less fat and more whole grains. And so you're following all the rules, but they're the wrong rules. And yet you can't let them go because it's what your doctor and all the experts keep telling you. The fear of breaking out of that conventional wisdom and going against what you perceive as the right way of doing things is absolutely holding you back. So that is the rule follower. And then there's the outcast. And if you're an outcast, then I can definitely relate because that is actually my number one fear archetype as well. But if you're an outcast like me, then your biggest fear is typically the fear of being rejected. And that might sound a little bit similar to the people pleaser's fear of being judged or not being liked. But the way that it manifests is actually very different. You see, outcasts tend to manifest that deep fear of rejection by rejecting other people and other ideas first, right? It's like a preemptive strike. We reject people first and we reject ideas first before we can be rejected in return or before we can fail at them. It's like we just protect ourselves by rejecting everything. And on the surface, it sort of makes it seem like we don't actually care what other people think, but we actually care very deeply. Rejecting the world or things that might work for us means not having to face rejection and not having to fail, because it's way easier to say something like, "Oh, keto is dumb. Everybody's doing it. It's just another fad diet that won't actually work for me," than actually risk taking the action and not having it actually change the deeper issues that are causing that unhappiness. We also tend to reject anything that feels like it would make us vulnerable or require us to put ourselves out there in some way. So that's the outcast. Next up is another big one, self-doubt. And it's probably not hard to see how this can keep you stuck, especially when it comes to health and weight loss. Because if you are a self-doubter, you are already struggling with a deep feeling of insecurity and a fear of not being good enough. And really, what that means is that you have trouble believing that you are actually capable of making a real and positive change in your life. And it makes it really hard to find any more motivation to get started, because you're the kind of person who would never in a million years dream of taking that before picture and sharing it in the Facebook group, because your self-criticism would just be off the charts. But you also, at the same time, right, you're critical of yourself, but you also can be really critical of the people around you, maybe even those people who are posting those photos of themselves. In fact, sometimes your tendency to be super critical can put a strain on your relationships, because the people around you feel like you're always nitpicking on them. But really, where that comes from is that deep feeling of insecurity and not being enough that just weighs on you all the time. So that's the self doubter. And then there is the excuse maker fear archetype. And we can probably all think of at least one person we know who fits the excuse maker description, right? But basically, the excuse maker always has an excuse, a reason for why they can't get started. They are the masters of having good reasons, right? Or in the case of health and weight loss, maybe it's an excuse for why you've gained weight and why nothing you try will actually work for you. Maybe it's a thyroid issue. Maybe it's hormones. Maybe it's genetics. Maybe it's the fact that you don't have time or you have food sensitivities. Maybe it's type 2 diabetes or autoimmune or arthritis, or you're too old, or your husband doesn't support you, or you travel too much, or, right? There's always an excuse. And for the excuse maker, the deep underlying fear that you're struggling with is really the fear of taking responsibility or of being blamed. And sometimes this goes all the way back to childhood trauma with parents who constantly blamed you for things. But it's almost this visceral reaction to the idea of taking ownership for your own life and your own health. And so it keeps you stuck in excuse land where you never have to actually take the blame for how things have turned out. But at the end of the day, even a good excuse is still an excuse, right? That's what I always say. Even a good excuse, the best excuse in the world, is still an excuse. So that is the excuse maker. And then finally, there's the pessimist fear archetype. And if you've experienced a lot of hardship and adversity in your life, or you are currently going through a particularly hard season where you've had some pretty big challenges or trauma, maybe a divorce or a job loss or the death of someone close to you, you might be identifying as a pessimist. And when you get into pessimist mode, basically your biggest fear becomes experiencing more pain and adversity, right? Everything feels like a threat. So every opportunity just feels like too much risk. It's almost like you completely shut down and you become reluctant to try anything, because everything feels like an opportunity to get hurt again or to be hurt again. In essence, it's almost like you've given up. And not surprisingly, of all of the 7 archetypes, this is probably the hardest fear to work through and overcome, because it means you're just in a really dark place. However, of all the 7 archetypes, this is also the one that is most likely to be a temporary season. So most of us don't live in the pessimist fear archetype all the time, but it tends to be closely correlated to a time where there's just a lot of hard stuff happening. And so this is also a time where you just need to give yourself a lot of grace and probably also get some help. So that's the pessimist. And those are the 7 fear archetypes, the 7 ways that fear tends to show up in our lives. And it's really important to know too that these fear archetypes, right, they don't happen in a vacuum. They can show up in tandem or in a combination of a few different fear archetypes. Some people might have one archetype that's very dominant, but most people experience a little bit of several of them, right? But each person is also a little bit unique. It's almost like you have your own fear fingerprint. That's what I like to call it, your fear fingerprint of how your particular fear archetypes are showing up. So those are the fear archetypes. But the question then becomes, what can you actually do about it, right? How do you overcome the fear or fears that are holding you back and actually take action in your life? How do you not let those fears, whatever they are, consume you and keep you from getting what you actually want? Well, believe it or not, the first step, I think, is to actually just identify and acknowledge the way that fear is showing up for you, to literally shine a light on the way that fear is manifesting in your life right now and in the specific ways that it's holding you back. It's almost like a name it and claim it kind of thing. You have to actually know what you're working with. And I will say this too, if you want to find out exactly what your fear archetype is, I have an assessment. It's called the fear assessment, where it can help you determine your fear archetype. You can find that at doitscared.com. There's a free version and there's a paid version if you want like the full layout, but it's even the free version is very enlightening. So go and take that. You can find it at doitscared.com. But the important thing to know is that you can actually do something about it, right? The fear, however it is currently manifesting in your life, doesn't have to be the thing that's holding you back. All that matters is that you actually identify it. Because the thing you need to understand is that all of this fear that I just talked about, it's actually happening subconsciously beneath the surface, right? We don't actually know that this is what's happening until we've like sat back and analyzed it. And so because it's happening totally self-consciously beneath the surface without really realizing that's what's going on or even realizing that certain behaviors that you are doing right now are actually fear manifesting itself in very real and destructive ways. But as soon as you can take it from being subconscious to conscious, right? As soon as you can start to identify those patterns of behavior in your own life, that is when you suddenly have the power to actually change them. What was subconscious becomes conscious, and then you can see it happening. And what's more, you also start to realize that you have the power to choose something different. And that's where the first mindset shift starts to happen. Because instead of being subconsciously controlled by fear, you start to see how you can start to use it as a tool for growth. Because we all have these unique sets of fears and insecurities that hold us back. But if you can learn how to lean into them instead of running away from them, you can actually become stronger and more resilient. Because the reality is that each fear archetype is a double-edged sword. There's a good side to it and a bad side to it, right? There's a part of it that holds you back, but each one also has specific strengths associated with it. So if you're a procrastinator, you're afraid of making a mistake. Yes, you don't want to fail, but you also tend to be the kind of person who has attention to detail, right? You're often incredibly meticulous and organized. So that's a good thing that you can lean into. If you're a people pleaser, you tend to seek approval, but you're also typically a great person to be around. You're thoughtful, you're well liked, you're fun. If you're a rule follower, you can get really stuck in black and white thinking, but you also tend to be incredibly diligent and responsible and have high follow through. If you're an outcast, you fear rejection, but you're also often an independent thinker with a lot of drive. If you're a self doubter, you can struggle with insecurity, but you also tend to be incredibly empathetic. So, by understanding your own fear archetype, you can actually start to use it as fuel to reach your goals instead of letting it keep you stuck. And that mindset shift, just that little tweak in how you look at yourself and how you're showing up in your life can actually be incredibly motivating. So that's the first step. You have to do that sort of introspective work to determine how fear is showing up in your life and how it's currently holding you back. The next step then is to get really clear about your why. Because the truth is that if your reasons for wanting to lose weight and get healthy aren't strong enough, then it's going to be very easy to let fear and self doubt get in the way of your goals. But if you have a very strong and compelling reason why you want to do this, that's a powerful motivator. And it's something that will help keep you going even when things get tough. So take some time to really think about and get clear on your why. Why does this matter to you? Why is this important? What will losing weight and getting healthy allow you to do or allow you to have that you're not currently able to do or to have or to be, right? How will your life be different? How will you feel? And how will not making a change impact you in the long run? And once you have that why, write it down and keep it somewhere where you can see it every single day. Remind yourself of it often and use it as motivation to keep going even when things get hard. And this is something that in our program, we definitely focus on in phase 0, just because we know how important it is. Because without that big why, it's too easy to quit or too easy to not begin. You have to want it more than you're scared of it. Let me say that again because it's important. You have to want it more than you are scared of it. So that's step 2, get clear about your why. The third step is to start small and to focus on taking small, consistent steps in the right direction. Because the reality is that big goals can be very overwhelming and they can often feel so far out of reach that it's really hard to even know where to start. And that is like a recipe for disaster when it comes to fear, right? That's exactly the time where fear and self-doubt starts to creep in and keep us from taking any action at all. It paralyzes us. But at the same time, action is literally the antidote to fear. It is the cure. And so if you can take any action, any step in the right direction, it will help to build your confidence and your courage and help propel you to take the next step. I always say this, that courage is like a muscle. You have to build it. And so those tiny little steps are what are going to build that muscle. Because the truth is that you have to do it all at once. We think we do, but you don't. You don't have to change your entire life overnight. You just have to start. And the best way to do that is to start small, to focus on making small, sustainable changes that you can actually stick with. So instead of trying to overhaul your entire diet and your exercise routine all at once, start by making one small change. Maybe it's cutting out soda. Maybe it's reading your food labels. Maybe it's adding more water or going for a 10-minute walk after dinner. Or maybe it's taking the time to track what you're eating so you can just be aware of your habits. Or maybe it's just showing up to that live workshop I told you about and daring to ask one question. Because once you've gotten comfortable with that one change, then you can add another one and then another one. And before you know it, those small changes start to add up to big results. But the key is to start small and to focus on taking small, consistent steps in the right direction. And then the fourth step for overcoming fear is to be willing to ask for help and to not be afraid to seek out the support and resources that you need to be successful. And I know just that in and of itself can feel scary, right? It feels so scary sometimes to ask for help. We have this idea that we have to do it all on our own, but the reality is you don't have to do it all on your own, right? There's so many people out there, no matter what it is that you want to do, that are there ready and willing to help and support you on your journey. Basically, it's surrounding yourself with the people that are going to motivate you to keep taking action. And if you're listening to this podcast, then you're already taking a great first step, right? Because there's so much valuable information and inspiration here that can help you get started. But don't be afraid to seek out other resources as well, right? Whether that's finding an accountability partner or a friend or joining our TAS program or working with a coach or a personal trainer or even just finding books and podcasts that can help you change your mindset and stay motivated. There's no shame in asking for help. And it is, in fact, a very powerful way to overcome the fear of failure because it allows you to surround yourself with people who can support and encourage you and help you stay on track. So that's step 4. The next step for overcoming fear is being willing to be honest with yourself and to take a good, hard look at what's not working in your life right now. Because the reality is that if you keep doing the same things you've always done, you're going to keep getting the same results. And if you're not happy with those results, then something has to change. And it's not easy, right? It's not easy to be honest with yourself, but you have to be. You have to be willing to just take that step back and hold up the mirror and take that look at what you're doing right now, right? What's not working right now, the current habits, the current behaviors, all the things that are holding you back, and be willing to make a change. Because when it comes down to it, the truth is that you are the only person who has the power to change your life. No one else can do it for you. I can't do it. My program can't do it, right? Like nobody in the world can do it for you. You can't pay somebody to do it for you. You are the one who has to make a change. You can get people to help you. You can get people to encourage you. You can get the right resources and tools. You can pay for all of that. At the end of the day, it really comes down to you and you willing to be honest with yourself. And finally, the final step for overcoming fear in your life, and probably also the hardest one, even though being honest with yourself can be pretty hard too, is actually being willing to change your mindset and to change your self-talk, right? To let go of all of the limiting beliefs and the negative self-talk that's holding you back. Because the reality is that a lot of times we are our own worst enemy. And the things that we are telling ourselves on a daily basis, the story we are telling ourselves on a daily basis has a huge impact on our ability to succeed. So you have to be willing to do that work. And it is hard work to change your mindset, right? It is hard work to change those limiting beliefs and to start to replace them with positive, empowering thoughts. And it's hard work to learn how to be kind to yourself and to practice self compassion and to give yourself the grace to keep going even when you mess up, right? Even when you're not perfect, even when it doesn't go exactly the way you want it to not let fear and self doubt get in the way of all those things you want to do. And again, it's not easy. And that really is why it's so important to surround yourself with the right people who have the right mindset. I can't say this strongly enough. The power of having a community of people who have that mindset around you is huge. It's life-changing, and I see that all the time in our program. This is a little sidebar tangent, but I really do. There's so many women, and you hear them because I have them come on the podcast, and they talk about this, right? The fact that, yes, they were excited to lose the weight, but what they gained out of being surrounded in a community of people who are focused on mindset is that their mindset changed, and suddenly they were willing to do things that they would have never thought they would do that had nothing to do with weight loss or health, right? That had to do with going after a different job or starting a business or daring to speak up and set boundaries in their life, in their personal life with their friends and family that they weren't willing to do or able to do before. They became stronger, they became more confident. Like it changes everything when you change your mindset. And it's why we focus so much on mindset in our program, why it's not just about giving you a meal plan and sending you on your way, because we know that true change takes time and it happens as much with the story you're telling yourself as it does with changing your eat. Because really what it comes down to is that you are capable of so much more than you think. You have the power to change your life. You have the power to create the life that you want. You have to be willing to take that first step though, and to not let that fear of failure hold you back. Oh, friends, went a little long today, but there you have it. The 7 fear archetypes and the 6 practical steps that you can take to actually overcome that fear of failure, that fear of getting started in a way that's going to actually allow you to make progress towards your health and weight loss goals. And while I know that's not always easy and there will still be days where it feels like a struggle, I also know that it's possible. I know that because I have been there. I have struggled with all of those same things. And yet, I've also seen the power of everything that I just talked about. I don't say this because I haven't been there. I talk about all of these things because it's stuff that I've had to implement in my own life to create a life that I love. And if I can do it, I know you can do it. So don't let fear hold you back. Take that first step and keep going, one small step at a time. All right, friends, that is it for today's episode. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you found it inspiring. I hope it gave you some practical strategies for overcoming fear and making progress towards your health and weight loss goals. And if you did love it, I would love it if you would take a second to share it with a friend or family who you think might benefit from hearing it too. And then, of course, be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button on whichever platform you like to listen to, because we've got lots of other great episodes and content coming your way very soon. And I don't want you to miss any of it. And in the meantime, I will be back very soon with another new episode. I will see you then.